Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the Beverage Container Redemption Pilot Project Grant Funding Workshop. We are excited to be here with all of you today. So if those of you that have not signed in either downstairs or up here, please do so before you leave today. So we'll go ahead and get started. We've got a lot on our agenda today, and we want to make sure that we have ample time to address everyone's concerns and questions as well at the end of the presentation. My name is Davina Cadiz, and I'm the supervisor in the grants unit portion of MMLA within Cal Recycle. Joining me here on the panel is Shamila Tooker, who is the grant manager for this program. Elisa Hernandez is the section manager. Jennifer Akins, the program manager representing DOR, and Michael Vandenberg, who is the point person and also the recycling specialist for the pilot project program as well. So, and in addition, we're joined here by Adam Tauber, who's the division assistant director, and we also representing the firm branch is Michelle Martin, our branch chief. We have Mike Miller here from DOR, Carrie Holler's here, as well as Anthony Bellistreri, who is one of our legal attorneys on board here. So before we begin, I want you guys to kind of look around. There are exit points in the hearing room. Well, there's one behind you, and there's one on either side here behind me. And make sure that you're aware that in the event of a fire alarm or an emergency, that we are required to evacuate this room most immediately. And please take your valuables with you. Do not use the elevators. We have the stairwell or staircase that you can access. And if you cannot use the stairs, you will be directed to a protective vestibule inside a stairwell. So should we have to relocate, more likely than not, we'll probably have to relocate across the street at the Cesar Chavez Park. So make sure that you look both ways when crossing the street. We want everyone to be safe. Restrooms and water fountains are out this back door or the front door, and go down the hallway to your left all the way around. You'll see the men's and women's restroom as well. And there's also a cafeteria downstairs should you need to get a cup of coffee or just a snack. So during today's workshop, our goal is to inform the public of the opportunity for funding as authorized by statute, share our intent to release the funds so that they can be utilized by the pilot projects in the manner we are presenting. Also, the stakeholder workshop is a means for us to receive feedback and comments from the public regarding any concerns for consideration that we will definitely push forward to our directorate here within Cal Recycle, and also to inform or clarify existing law. So we will be accepting comments and questions from webcast attendees and those in the audience here today after the panel members have had the opportunity to go through each of our respective presentations and agenda items. We do request that those of you in the audience wishing to provide feedback also submit your comments to us in writing so we have something concrete to look at. And for those of you joining us in the room, we have a couple of staff members that will be roaming around with a mic. So speak up, speak loudly, and definitely make your questions known and your concerns known. Those are super important to us. And all the comments should be submitted to the Bev Container Grants at calrecycle.ca.gov email. So with that, TJ, you have the agenda up. So this current agenda provides a brief overview of our workshop today. And with that, I'd like to hand over the program summary and purpose to Jennifer or Michael.
I'll be starting off. Hello, my name is Michael Vanderberg. I do know many of you. I'd say I know about half the people in the audience through the work I've done over the last year with the pilot program. It's good to see friendly faces and some new faces. So I'm glad you're all here. Um, just a quick summary and a background of the pilot program. As many of you know, the California Bottle Bill has been one of the most successful recycling and litter reduction bills in the country since it was enacted in about 1987. Almost 400 billion beverage containers have been recycled in California, so it's been very, very successful. Unfortunately, now that the program is about 30 plus years old, it's having a midlife issue, and we've had some issues and problems around the state of California. Uh, Falling scrap prices and other issues have caused about 1,000 or more recycling centers to close down in the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm sure pretty much everybody in this room is aware of that. And that's why the pilot program was started, to address the severe reduction of recycling centers. There are many communities in California that don't have any recycling centers. And so hopefully the pilot can address this. Also, because of the loss of recycling centers, it's caused the recycling rate in California to drop below 80%, which is a goal of the program. So briefly, in 2017, SB 458 was signed by the former Governor Brown. It was signed into law. That was in October of 2017. And what this Senate bill did is it authorized CalRecycle to approve up to 5 pilot programs in jurisdictions. The initial goal was to provide convenient beverage container redemption in urban and rural areas that do not have enough recycling centers for their residents and for consumers. And so I came on a little over a year ago, and we thought January 1st we're going to go gangbusters, and there were issues with the original bill. So this year, in October of 2019, AB 54 was passed and then signed by the governor. And what this bill did is, first of all, it extended the deadline for us to accept pilot project applications. It also extended the deadline for jurisdictions to apply from January 1st, 2020 to January 1st, 2022. Also, it tweaked, and that is a government term, it tweaked the program to allow us greater flexibility in how to run the program for jurisdictions. Also, and this is a big one, it provided up to $5 million in grants for pilot projects around the state. So, next slide, please. So the program's purpose, I touched on that. It's to improve redemption opportunities in unserved convenience zones. And for those of you who, I think most of you are familiar with what a convenience zone is, but what it is, it's a zone around a supermarket that creates a convenience zone, and the initial goal was to have a recycling center there, so the people who would buy CRV beverage containers would have a place to get their nickels and dimes back. I do not know the latest, but I believe it's 40 or 50% of convenience zones in California are not served by a recycling center. And I happen to live in one of them. I'm not very happy about that. So the pilot is geared towards improving redemption opportunities in those unserved zones. Also, it's to create new, convenient, and innovative recycling opportunities. And it's been really interesting working with a lot of you because some of your proposed pilots are very different. A pilot can be a fixed location, or it could be a mobile location. It could be truck-based. It could be a drop-off program where people drop off their material. It can be a pickup program where you're actually going and you're doing a route. Some of them don't have to have an immediate cash payment. The pilot program allows electronic payment to consumers. But basically, the flexibility allows pilots to have different hours and different days of operation. You don't have to be open 30 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. There's a lot more flexibility. You can also have different locations. So if you have a mobile and you're having, let's say your jurisdiction is having trouble getting a grocery store to allow a recycling center there all the time? Would they allow it 1 or 2 days a week, and you could have that recycling center move around? Another thing that the pilot allows is it doesn't have to be one jurisdiction. It doesn't have to be one city or one county. It can be a team, a group of cities and counties coming together. And I was just talking with a group this morning. They're having trouble finding a location. And I said, well, have you talked to this city or that city that's near you that are having trouble? So you could have teams. So the foundation of the pilots is that they can be different, they can be innovative. And if you have another idea, get a hold of me. If you don't have my business card, please seek me after this meeting. I'll get it to you. If you have another idea, run it by me and I'll tell you if it will work for this pilot project. So all of this together the goal is to improve the recycling opportunities for consumers. And also, it's not just for consumers, it's for jurisdictions. I'd say the greatest roadblock that we have had has been jurisdictions not wanting recycling centers. They associate it with a certain problem. And so I've talked to jurisdictions and said, okay, what's your problem? What kind of pilot could we have to mitigate that problem or reduce that problem? May not get rid of it totally, but instead of just saying no recycling center, okay, what's your problem and what different kind of recycling opportunity could you have that would either alleviate that problem or totally get rid of it? So we're flexible. The ultimate goal is the 5 pilot project areas is to increase the recycling rate. And that will be my job after the pilots are up and running. I will work closely with the jurisdictions and with the operators, and we will monitor how the pilots are going, any issues that may be there, maybe things can be tweaked midstream, but also to see if these pilots are actually improving the recycling rates in the jurisdictions that are implementing them. So that's why we're doing the pilot. So with that, I'm going to pass the next section on project funding eligibility to Jennifer Akins.
Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Please bear with me. I do have a little bit of a cough and a cold. It's asthma mostly, so I apologize for that in advance. Jurisdictional eligibility. One of the things that we needed to do was to try to get this funding available to the pilot projects as quickly as possible. And by funding the jurisdictions, that's one of the fastest ways that we thought that we could get that money out there in order to support the pilot projects. The pilot projects, the jurisdictions are going to be responsible for running and managing the pilot projects at the jurisdictional level. So we want to make sure that the recyclers and jurisdictions are working together to make sure that these are successful. Excuse me. As you can see from the slide, the definition of what a jurisdiction is included. Any jurisdiction that will apply for a grant as funding for part of the pilot project will need to have been approved to operate a pilot project prior to applying for a grant. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Funding allocation. The AB 54 allotted $5 million for the support of the pilot projects. One of the ways that we've proposed implementing this is to give $1 million per pilot project. Pilot projects can potentially, if there's any money left over, if we don't approve 5 pilot projects, or if a pilot project doesn't utilize all of that $1 million, pilot projects, the jurisdictions can then reapply and ask for more money after December 31st, 2020, excuse me. Next slide, please.
Applications. Sorry. For the review grant applications, staff will review all grant applications for completeness and applicant eligibility. Complete applications will be evaluated to confirm the approval status of the pilot project. CalRecycle will review proposals to determine if costs are appropriate and directly related to the pilot project. Applications will be received on a first-come, first-served basis. Anybody have any questions?
The timeline for grant funding Staff will post a notice of funds available, which we call a NOFA, on CalRecycle's website. The NOFA will include the funding, the eligibility requirements, the deadlines, and other important information. These will be distributed through CalRecycle's applicable listservs and through further outreach of mailing lists that we have. So right now, we're hoping to get the NOFA out by the next public meeting, which is December 17th. So further with the timeline, December we'll post the NOFA, the grant application and instructions, and ongoing, the grant applications will be due, the initial and ongoing until January 1st, 2022. The grant application evaluation and process funding determination is also ongoing through January 2022, and the grant agreements will be distributed and executed through January 2022. The grant term ends June 30th, 2022. So that means that if you have a grant, all projects and payments should be all funds expended. Yes. Okay. So our next section here, we'll open it up for discussion and questions that we will intake and answer further on. Also, if you could please follow up by sending your questions to the email address listed below on the slide, which is bevcontainergrants@calrecycle.ca.gov. Okay. We have some roving microphones here for anyone who wants to comment or ask questions.
All right, good afternoon. Jeff Donlevy from Ming's Recycling. So with the eligibility, it can only be an approved pilot program, so grant applications cannot be submitted until after a pilot project has been awarded?
That is correct.
Okay, so then can you go into the timing of the pilot project application and approval process? Is it a 30-day process? Is it a 90-day process? How long until an application is submitted until it's accepted or rejected?
Well, once we receive an application, we have 30 days to notify the applicant whether it's complete or not, or we have questions. And then the clock stops and then it returns. And once we get the answers to that question, the clock starts again. And we have another 30 days to say, yes, it's complete. We have everything we need. And after that, we have 30 days to go through our review process.
So just to confirm, 30 days to review completeness, and then the clock stops for a Q&A.
Yep.
And then once the answers are submitted, there's another 30 days plus 30 days?
No. So if somebody submits an application and it's complete, usually within a week to 10 days, we can say, hey, it's complete, it's good, we're going to pass it through the process. Or we could say, wait a minute, we have 5 questions or whatever, and we'll detail what the questions were. And then the 30-day clock stops then. So when we get all the answers, that 30 days to review the application starts over again. But if it's simply a matter of, oh, our questions were answered, again, within 5 to 7 days, we can say, okay, we have everything we need. So you don't have to wait the full 30 days. But by statute, we have 30 days up to.
Okay, so with the pilot program applications, there's one for the jurisdiction, and then for the recycler that will include the operational plan. So those two will be submitted and approved. Let's just say hypothetically the recycling company goes out of business, because unfortunately things happen. Can the jurisdiction switch to another recycler as long as they use the same operational plan?
Yes. Yeah. The statute and the regulations say, the jurisdiction can remain the same. So if something's not working out with the recycler, or if the recycler goes out of business, a jurisdiction can have another recycler apply to be part of their pilot. Or a jurisdiction can have multiple companies as recyclers. So you could have one company doing one kind of thing, or maybe a fixed site, and another company doing something that's more mobile. So you could have multiple recyclers doing multiple things in a pilot program.
Okay, as far as the grant funding, at what point will that get detailed as to what that can be used for? How much for staff time? How much for consulting time? Legal, equipment, direct labor? When's the guidance going to come out on what the grant funds can be used for?
Thank you for that question. Typically, what will happen is once the Division of Recycling has made the determination on who to approve, who they're going to approve for the pilot project, it comes to us on the grant side. We will be requiring those local jurisdictions to submit an actual budget document itemizing all those expenditure-related costs, whether they would be for personnel or infrastructure costs, as well as we'll be requiring them to complete the actual work plan as well through the end of the grant term. So, I mean, that could be just depending on how well you have, the applicants have everything lined out. That could be a week, could be a couple of weeks. But, once that process is completed, then it's submitted to us and we'll process it on our end. In which case we will, once an award happens, an RFA award happens, we'll be able to send the actual grant agreement cover sheet. The awarded applicant then will have 60 days to return that back to us with signatures. And then we will execute it as soon as those signatures are received and completed.
Okay, so with the grant funding, the money is going to be paid out all at once or over time? Is it based on performance or a promise to perform?
So we will request that the grantees submit a payment request form. We will then, in our grants unit, will review and make sure that all supporting documentation is included with that payment request. And once that happens, we can turn it around, within a few days and get make sure that it's, again, so long as the supporting documentation is there. So if you're asking for specific reimbursement for personnel, we need to be able to see timesheets. We need to be able to see ledgers. If you're providing us with a payment request or making a request to reimburse for infrastructure costs, then we need to see invoices and actual receipts for that.
Davina, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically the grant payments are made in arrears.
That is correct.
For work that has been completed.
Yes,
correct?
thank you.
Okay, the indication is the money is going to go to the jurisdictions. When AB 54 was published prior to the vote, I think there were some people that didn't catch that, and I was one of them, embarrassingly enough to say. I didn't see that the money was going to the jurisdiction instead of the actual recycling company that was going to be conducting the program. Is there any discussion or concern that a jurisdiction is going to submit an application for a pilot program with a recycling company and then submit a grant application, and let's say it's approved for $1 million? Any concern that this money going to a jurisdiction might trigger or violate a procurement process within a city where they did not properly go out to bid for services, because I thought with SB 458, it was an opportunity for recycling companies, small companies, private businesses, to work with jurisdictions to introduce new and innovative services in an area that was underserved. So if there's a recycling company that introduces these new services and it looks like it's a great program, and then they submit an application with the city and it is awarded a large sum of money, my concern is it might trigger some sort of procurement process that could knock out or completely change the economics of the pilot program, where the city would have to take the services out to bid. So was there any discussion about that? Is there any opportunity to switch it so the money is not going directly to the jurisdiction, which again would add another level of oversight to a recycler? And I think the oversight is best done by the Cal Recycle staff that understands it. To get a jurisdiction to fully understand the CRV program and all the complexities of the different revenue streams, scrap values, CRV payments, administrative payments, processing payments, handling fees. The concern is this might cause some jurisdictions to shy away from this opportunity. So was there any discussion about the problem of the money going directly to the cities rather than to the recycling companies that are going to be doing the work?
So, no. That's the short answer. That's not been a consideration for Cal Recycle as we've gone through this. We're dealing with the statute as it's been written. No go-backs, trying to get it done as fast as we can. So if there's an issue with procurement law as it applies to the jurisdictions, that's the jurisdiction's issue, not Cal Recycle's issue. So we're just looking for properly executed plans and proper funding requests, and the money goes out. That's the best we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Kevin Drew from the City of San Francisco. Jeff, following on from your question, I've been thinking about this in our situation and the difficulty of kind of two administrative processes that you'd have through Cal Recycle and then through the city, in our case, City of San Francisco. And in thinking about that, I've been talking with our administrative folks as well to see if there is a way to kind of line item that if it's equipment, for instance, I'm trying to think of things that might be easier than, well, I'm not sure whether they're going to be harder or easier, is the cost of consultants or the cost of staff or the piece of equipment going to be the one that's more compatible with an expedited process. Where if that particular piece of equipment, let's use a piece of equipment, a very specialized piece of equipment, or whether it's a truck or a sorting piece of machinery, it's something that can be lined out with specifications, with firm quotes from the company that's fabricating it, with delivery. All those items can be there. And what I'm thinking about is a way for that to line up both for Cal Recycle and for the jurisdiction, to create a kind of a expedited approval so that can be, I appreciate that you can turn around a reimbursement submission, payment submittal in a short period of time, let's say a week or 10 days, even. That's light speed for government, and I appreciate that. We can do that in San Francisco sometimes, but it's sometimes we can't. And I'm trying to help us think through what could be a mechanism, or it doesn't have to be a mechanism. It can be an individual specific kind of paper trail that helps just helps with this problem, because we're seeing that problem in our pilot project. There's a lot of upfront costs and there's nobody with cash flow is the problem. And the city's not in a position to advance funding. The recyclers are not in that position either. In our case, the supermarkets are not necessarily in that position. I think there was the hope that Jeff was referring to a moment ago in the legislation that this would be able to, there'd be a way for this to help create some of that cash flow. So, I mean, I understand the answer is no, Adam, at the moment, but I'm asking us to put our thinking caps on. And like I said, I've talked to our administrative people. The problem could be more in the city of San Francisco than in case of Cal Recycle. And Jeff, I think that's what you mentioned in the procurement level. That's when you get down to a city procurement contract, all kinds of different things are required. So maybe the question is there a process or a conversation that we can continue to have with specific instances where you would talk with us, and maybe it's the admin folks in our city, our jurisdiction, that have to satisfy each party has to satisfy the other, essentially. That.
Right. I don't know. In terms of the process for getting the approval of the funds, from our perspective, that's fairly straightforward. I have no idea what the procurement issues will be for San Francisco, and I don't think that Cal Recycle can be responsible for knowing what all the rules are in every jurisdiction in the state. That being said, there are some provisions for advance payments, but they're limited. And I think it's limited 10%, but with a cap. Was it $50,000? Has that changed? I don't know. You know? No. Yeah. So I think that's the cap on payments for you. It's typically a situation like you've described, where you've got an executed contract for something, and you need to move some money along in order to get things going. But for the state, it's very clear. You know, by and large, payments are in arrears. The commitment to funding from the state can be useful for getting a bridge loan or for getting an appropriation from your jurisdiction on a temporary basis to being reimbursed by Cal Recycle.
I guess that gets into the question that I wasn't sure if Jeff was poking around at, which is, because the jurisdictions is the recipient, can you get a loan on a piece of equipment that's being paid for through a grant from the jurisdiction? And then does that mean that I'm now sort of talking about financing questions, which none of us here necessarily would be experts in. Who would own, if the ownership of that piece of equipment, whether it's a truck or a sorting system, how would that be funded in a way that, I guess, how could we get these funds to pay for that situation? I mean, maybe I'm asking some of my colleagues here or others with experience in this, in the equipment side, or perhaps the folks on the grant side, whether there's an example of that you could provide for us. I think Adam kind of described one, but maybe I'm looking for more specifics.
So we'll take Adam's statement related to, there's been advance payments up to 10%. I don't know that we have that latitude at this point. But what I do want to say, something that you did bring up was perhaps you purchase equipment with our grant funds, with Cal Recycle grant funds. And you basically, it would support your project, by being able to take that equipment and use it as a collateral for another partner's right. So that would not be legal. That equipment, once you purchase it and close the grant, you cannot sell that equipment for 5 years.
That means you can't collateralize
You
it either.
cannot collateralize it either. That is my understanding. And that's from the point of not the reimbursement of the grant. All our grant, when you submit your invoices, all expenditures are in arrears. We will facilitate trying to expedite those reimbursements. Expenditures, you have to have 3 bids or go through the process of demonstrating a sole source, purchase, and then again, at the point that you've purchased and close that grant, for 5 years from the closing date of that grant, that equipment cannot be sold.
Loisa, who typically owns the equipment that's purchased? That'd be the grantee.
The grantee,
And in this case, that's going to be the jurisdiction.
correct.
I'm sorry, what was the question at the start?
Who owns the stuff that you buy?
Yeah.
That's going to be the jurisdiction.
I can't say what the city of San Francisco feels like owning. I wish I could. That's it's an important point for me to take back to our city folks to understand how that would work.
Yeah, just apologies for frustration, but if the grantee, the jurisdiction is going to own the equipment and they're going to own trucks, vehicles for a mobile program, I think from a liability standpoint, I'm not an insurance expert, but I think that would prohibit a private operator from operating the mobile program. I think the jurisdiction is going to have their staff and their insurance if they're owning the equipment. Otherwise, the cost of insurance to sublet it to a private contractor might make this a no-go. So just a comment.
Thank you for that comment. Blair, do we have some questions with our webcast attendees?
Yes, there are 2. There's one from Jay Nair from Tom Recollection Solutions, who's asking, is the pilot project required to accept all eligible containers? An example, if they come up with a proposal that accepts 95% of the containers with some innovative electronic settlement idea, will that be acceptable?
The pilot projects do need to accept all eligible CRP material.
We also have another question from Crystal Chavez-Jones of San Bernardino County. Will the pilot project webcast be posted on the CowerCycle website? And the answer is yes, sometime this week.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a couple of questions. I'm Susan Collins from Container Recycling Institute. The first one had to do with all of the triggers on the start date that were in the legislation. In AB 54, there's a report that has to be written by CalRecycle by March 1st of 2020, and there's approval of the 2 budget committees, right? And there's approval by the Director of Finance. So I know you guys have been working on that, and I'm wondering what the earliest realistic date is that the funding would be available. That's my first question.
So that's a different pot of money than what we're talking about for the pilot programs.
Okay.
That's a separate $5 million, and I'm not prepared to discuss that right now.
Well, that's a huge thing because I read the bill wrong. Then I thought that was this same $5 million.
No, so AB 54 had two $5 million appropriations. One is specifically for the pilot programs, and the other one was if Cal Recycle can manage to jump through a whole number of administrative hoops, then there's an additional $5 million to spend in support of recycling centers generally.
Okay. So, let's rephrase the question then. So what's the most realistic, earliest start date for the funding for the pilot projects?
Well, that first of all, it's contingent on applications
Right.
being received, being complete, and then being accepted. So that's the first step. And then after that, they can apply for grant funding, which can take how long?
I mean, conceivably, I mean, you know, I would say, I mean, we could start the funding January, February, as soon as possible. And that's why we are slated to ensure that the criteria RFA goes out in December public meeting so we can get the funding out as soon as possible or shortly thereafter. That's what our goal is.
Thank you. Okay, so then on the $5 million, to clear up the confusion, just to be absolutely certain, basically in 2019 there were 3 separate pots of $5 million.
That is correct. It would have been easier for us to talk about it if each one of those had been a slightly different number than 5 million. But yes, in fact, there are 3 separate pots of $5 million.
Thank you. Another question on who is eligible. It's jurisdictions, so it's cities and counties, but I was also thinking about a large number of JPAs that are in the state that have to do with waste management issues. I was thinking of Stop Waste and the Mojave Desert and Mountain Recycling Authority, and in Sonoma County there's another one. How would those folks, how might they be eligible, or would they have to go through jurisdictions, or have you given consideration to those kinds of agencies applying?
So they're not eligible to have a pilot project because they can't permit the recycling centers. So if a JPA wanted to partner with the jurisdiction, then they would be able to be a partner in running a pilot project, but the actual jurisdiction where the pilot project is going to operate would need to apply.
Another couple of questions. There was some reference to gathering data on improving recycling rates. That was from Michael. And I was wondering if there would be a report to the legislature on progress from these programs with reporting on how many people were served and how many are still unserved in the recycling deserts in the state.
We have not formulated our metrics and statistics, but I would assume that we would incorporate that in our reports, yes.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Wright. I'm a consultant to the City and County of San Francisco. So there is a definition in SB 458 for who is eligible for this pilot project. And has Cal Recycle taken the time to actually, given this definition, decide who's in that queue? About which jurisdictions, for instance, had 75% of convenience zones in a jurisdiction unserved? Had at least 6 unserved convenience zones? Has that list been created by Cal Recycle of eligible candidates?
So we don't have a list of the eligible candidates who can apply. When SB 458 was originally enacted, it was as of October 10th, 2017, but AB 54 modified that. So it's going to be the eligibility date when the application is received. So depending on what happens in the jurisdiction when the application is received, that will determine who's going to be eligible to apply for a pilot project. And jurisdictions can also partner. That you might have a city and county apply together. So it's difficult to put out all of the possible combinations of who could be eligible to apply. But certainly when they contact us or we'll reach out, to make sure that we provide that information to them.
There's some other data points in the system that aren't mentioned in the legislation. One would be the percentage or the amount of unredeemed deposits due to inconvenience. So 80% is the goal, correct? 80% is the goal for, okay. So San Francisco, over the last 4 years, has been averaging somewhere around 68% redemption, not 80%. So over the last 4 years, that 12% delta works out to over $30 billion. So San Francisco's been sending to Sacramento over $30 million over the last 4 years in unredeemed deposits that are, this is the delta underneath 80%. This doesn't count the 20% above 80%. San Francisco also has, with only 3% of the sales, has an extraordinary inconvenience situation to where the stores who choose option B have been invoiced in the last 4 years over $9 million, of which $6 million has been paid to Cal Recycle. In other words, $3 million has not been collected. So there's a couple of questions here. It seems like San Francisco was sent over, I think I calculated to be 38 million incremental dollars to Cal Recycle the last 4 years. It seems a little absurd that it should only be allowed to ask for $1 million back to do a pilot project in a city that, with a population of under 900,000 on a daily basis, has 1.2 million people in it.
I'll take this one. So first of all, in terms of sales and returns data, while we collect the returns data from every recycling center, every curbside program, every collection program, and we know where those are located, we have no idea where those containers originate. That's first. Second, in terms of sales data, we collect that on a statewide basis without regard to jurisdiction. So recycling rates per zip code or jurisdiction are unknown to us, and under current law are unknowable to us. You can argue all you want that San Francisco is paying more than its share of CRV. You could also argue that San Francisco has created an unserved zone epidemic in their city of their own making. I'd prefer that we not argue points like that, Tom. We are spending the money the way that the legislation has authorized it to be spent. It says $5 million for pilot programs. We've tried to come up with what is the quickest, most fair way that we can divide that up, that keeping in mind we have received no applications, in a fair way. $5 million cut across into 5 separate pilot programs. If there's any money left over that's not asked for, it can be reapplied for, as we detailed there. But we don't have time to go through a lengthy rulemaking process to come up with some arcane formula based on population or unredeemed deposits.
Why would that be arcane?
Tom, how much time do we have to do this?
I don't
How
know,
long
maybe-
did it take us to do the regulations for the
I guess myself and a
458?
couple of other people in here would be good at looking at the books, though. So, I mean, I offer my services free of charge.
Thank you,
Having said
Tom.
that, who determined the $1 million?
The administration did.
But the administration being governor, the governor's office.
The administration did.
Is there a who?
No,
Did anybody talk to Assemblyman Ting or Senator Wiener?
doesn't matter.
Okay.
When the executive branch gets a bill, we execute what's in print. Side deals don't count. Sorry. You had a deal in the back room with Mr. Ting, that was unknown to us and not part of the bill. We execute what's in print.
Do we have any more questions?
I'm Sloan Pagal from Zero Waste Sonoma. Susan brought up a point about JPAs, and I'm concerned because we have been working on an application with, in partnership with the jurisdictions that we serve. So I'm just wondering how to proceed with this because, that's part of our job as a JPA is to look out for our jurisdictions, and this is the work that we're doing for them. So what should we do?
Well, if you're applying in partnership with the jurisdiction is going to be the responsible party for the pilot project, but there's no reason why you couldn't continue to work with the jurisdiction to make that happen.
Michael will help you sort it out.
Do we have any questions on the webcast? Oh, Susan.
This question is tangentially related, so we can handle it offline if we need to. But I've received a number of questions from jurisdictions who are in the areas where redemption centers have closed recently, and they're trying to interact with the grocery stores in their area to give them guidance on, or to ask them to take back containers or whatever. And I don't know if Cal Recycle has guidance, like some fact sheets or explainers or something available on the website or something like that, so that we can understand what are the procedures that grocery stores must undertake when they take back containers in stores. So this is beyond whether or not they're signing the option A or option B affidavit, but when they're actually taking back containers in store, what do they need to do to be legal as they go through that process to do that in the proper way? So I'm wondering if Cal Recycle has, some sort of a fact sheet that they can give to a store and say, this is how you do it.
We do. And it's also available online. I can send you that link after the meeting.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about, again, the ownership question. Refresh my memory, which is evidently quite short. Does the jurisdiction have to own the equipment, or is there a mechanism where the jurisdiction, if it owns it and then it can transfer it, or is that 5-year rule that if the funding is used for equipment, it has to, even though it's a jurisdictions, I guess I'm thinking that somehow because the jurisdictions involved, that solves your ownership question, but I guess not.
The applicant will always be the owner of the equipment. The approved applicant, it's approved for the funding,
Yeah.
will always be the owner of any equipment purchased and reimbursed with Cal Recycle funds.
Well, then shifting gears, if that was an operator, then the operator, even though they can't sell it, I'm trying to think if the fact that they can use it would create some value that brings essentially cash flow or equity into the equation.
Kevin, I'm going to have our legal office do a little research to find out if the jurisdiction can then either lend or lease that equipment to the operator, even though they maintain ownership and control.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's some way that
because clearly that would be within the scope of the the purpose of the pilot programs.
Right, and you'd have the safeguard of the cities in place. To,
Right.
Yeah.
So
to act
we'll,
as
we'll
that.
check to make sure that that's something that's doable. We'll find a way. Okay.
Thank you, Adam. Any other questions?
Not to doubt your rulemaking, but I think you, as Adam, you're saying that the bill was passed and came to you, and you went about that effort. You came up with at the end of 1 year, you could, if the funds weren't spent, another applicant could reapply for another grant round. Is there anything hard and fast? Well, I mean, you've got 1 year down. Did you just pick that, or could you go 6 months at a time? I'm just thinking whether there's any flexibility in that, or whether that's now the rulemaking's done.
Why don't you submit that to us as a suggestion, and we'll take it under consideration.
Yeah.
As long as you're taking suggestions. Instead of making the maximum $1 million, make it $2 million. You can request up to a maximum of $2 million, and then you'll think about it. That's all.
We'll think about whether or not we'll think about it. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay.
Well, I think that closes our workshop. Please, if you have any more questions or comments, please submit them to. Can you put that up on? Okay. Well, there it is. The links and contacts. And through what date are we accepting these comments? Ongoing.
I do have to say the sooner, probably the better. So if you can get those comments and questions and suggestions this week, we would be much appreciative of that.
Yeah. Well, this concludes our workshop. Oh, Kevin, did you have another? Okay.